Welcome to the SEI podcast series, a production of Carnegie Mellon University's Software Engineering Institute. The SEI is a federally funded research and development center operated by Carnegie Mellon University and sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. A copy of today's podcast will be available on the SEI website at www.sei.cmu.edu/podcast. My name is Suzanne Miller. I'm a principal researcher here at the SEI, and today I'm very pleased to introduce to you two colleagues from our CERT division, Alex Volynkin and Angela Horneman. And so both of them have been working in ransomware, which is our topic for today. But before we get to that, I wanted to talk to each of you a little bit about what brought you to the SEI. What is it that you're doing that is exciting to you about the SEI?
So I started my research in information security and computer security with my master's and PhD work in malware analysis. And so malware would be the malicious software, which is has been a problem for quite a while now. And traditional methods of detection was to apply signature-based approaches to detect new malware and not previously known malware. So in my work, I did research that would dynamically detect malicious software as it executes in the more of a heuristic approaches that do not require previous knowledge about that malware. And so that was my PhD work when I was in grad school, and then later I was working for the industry for a number of years, working on cryptographic solutions. That would be for payment systems, for a variety of data protection solutions, encryption solutions, and things like that. And later I came to SCI, and here I work as a senior research scientist, and my areas of expertise vary from malicious software analysis to cryptographic solutions and analysis of security of cryptographic solutions, and also hardware and network security.
Okay. And Angela, what brought you here?
So I went back for my master's after spending several years in industry. Wasn't feeling that there was much room for growth in what I was doing, which was a little bit of everything for a mortgage software company.
Okay.
I decided that security seemed a lot more interesting and a lot more that I could make a positive impact, where when you're working with mortgage software, sometimes you wonder if you're making a positive impact or not. So I interned here starting after the first semester for my master's, and really liked what I was doing and stayed on afterwards.
Okay. And so both of you have been working recently in this idea of ransomware, which is when I think most people know you're being held hostage. Essentially, someone gets into your computer and asks you for money or asks you for something in return for releasing your computer to them. So that's kind of a scary thing. Yes. And this is something that has been increasing. There was a report in 2017 by Verizon that warned that these kinds of attacks were growing by 50% in the last year. And even today, as we are recording this, there's a ransomware attack that people may be reading about in the newspaper that's going on over in Europe. So this is a problem that has been around for a while. It's not going away. And so the big question is, how did we get to this point? And how do we deal with it? So why don't we start with, how did we get here? How did ransomware become such a prevalent aspect of what we have to deal with in today's information security environment?
I think it's a natural extension of malware. So it's simpler than stealing. If you're stealing somebody's credit card, then you have to assume that you have to make sure that whatever you're getting, you can cash in on. Whereas if you hold something hostage and expect a payment, well, somebody pays you. It's already there. You don't have to worry about being traced back, the credit card being turned off. You get the money in your account, you can take it out. It's been happening for years. Several years ago, you heard about the FBI splash pages that people would get from infected ads or clicking on emails. Well, now instead of just doing a splash page that you can't access anything else, they're actually encrypting. So sometimes individual files, sometimes the whole computer. Occasionally you still do see the splash screens where nothing's really in the background. But it's also becoming more commoditized.
So it's a commodity, so I can actually hire people or hire
Exactly.
someone to.
There's open source.
Yeah, oh, that's what I was looking for.
There's some open source out there. There's ransomware as a service, which you might see as RAAS. Where
Never thought we'd see that day.
yeah, so somebody has the ability to conduct an attack. You have somebody you want to attack. You provide them the information, then you split the profits. You know, a lot of places, if you can get a few home users to pay the ransom, you know, at a few $100s each, or if you can get an organization to pay a few $1,000s, for a lot of people everywhere in the world, that's a huge amount of income.
And actually that's I think a good point about this is that it may be outside of the U.S., especially with the open source.
Yep.
The accessibility of this to people that don't have good income possibilities
Right.
in regular ways. This is actually a fairly cheap way for them
Yeah.
to actually make money that is meaningful to them, even though it may not in our economy be as meaningful. So this is
Right.
not going to go away, is
No, it's
really
not
the
gonna go away.
answer there. So if you are attacked, what do you do? Who do you talk to? Who are you going to call? We don't have ransomware busters yet, but I mean, how do people, what's a reasonable way to deal with this? And are there, so there's kind of two sides to this. As an individual, what should you do? But also from the viewpoint of, as an SCI, as an institute researching this, what are we doing to try and help people avoid this, prepare for it, and recover from it?
For an individual user, it's a lot more difficult, especially if you're talking about somebody who doesn't have a lot of computer background. They're not really sure how their computer actually works.
Right.
That's a lot harder for them, even to understand how they got infected. Most of the case, that's usually through email. Somebody got an email or did a web search for something that they probably shouldn't have been searching for to begin with, clicked on an ad or something.
We call that clickbait.
Clickbait.
Yeah.
Got it installed that way. For many of the ransomware, there may be unencryptors that the attackers have made mistakes, so you can recover from it to an extent. Your best option as an individual user may be to contact some reputable support company. Or a family member or a friend, as much as we as security people joke about, always being talked, everybody's asking us the questions. Hey, we are here, we do know.
I have a brother who's in security. He's the guy I would call. I mean,
Right.
yeah, so if you have a friend that is reputable in that
Right.
arena and knowledgeable, then that can be helpful.
So as an individual user, that's probably your best option, is to find somebody who has some idea what they're doing that you can ask and get their expert advice on. As an organization, hopefully you've done stuff like backed up. That's good for individual users too. Make sure that you have anything that you have backed up on flash drives or CDs that you don't keep plugged into your computer,
Right.
because those could end up encrypted if they're attached. But that way you can just, take it somewhere, have it reset, wiped, and then just put your important stuff back on. The same thing goes for organizations. Really, they should make sure that they have good backups, but that's a more mitigation after you're infected. There's a lot that you can do to help prevent it, but it's not perfect. One of the things is be very careful with the email that you get. Really make sure that it's coming from the person who you think it's coming from. As an individual user, you will see a lot of email from people who who are in your address book, but they may have been compromised.
Yeah.
I see that all the time, where I have several friends whose addresses are spoofed and sent to me all the time, but I know that, okay, this is just weird. They wouldn't be saying that, or why would they be
uncharacteristic.
It's uncharacteristic, or it may be characteristic, but there's no background context. You haven't been talking to them that's something that they would actually be talking to you about through email. That's probably the biggest thing you do, is be very, very careful about your email. Make sure that whatever email provider you have does good spam filtering. The same thing goes for an organization. Be very diligent with your spam filters and your emails. If possible, use text-based email or at least disable any macros and executables from being delivered or executed.
Anything to add to that, Alex?
Yeah, I think I agree with Angela on the preventative measures there. One of the biggest things that any organization and individual can do is to back up the data, because ultimately, if you have the data that's encrypted by ransomware, and you would like to avoid paying ransom, your easiest way out of the situation is to take the backup that you've recently stored away and put the data back on your system. It will take some time to do the process, but if it's done properly, it should completely 100% recover what you've lost. And this is probably the best preventative measure that can be done with regards to ransomware. And also, it works regardless of the method that the ransomware chooses to encrypt, steal, or somehow prevent you from accessing your data. Phishing emails has been the primary attack vector to get ransomware on the system. The combination of phishing emails and some sort of exploit that would allow the code that's delivered through the phishing email to execute on the system. And so making sure that your operating system, all of your software is regularly updated, all the patches applied to it regularly, and making sure that phishing emails do not get the effect that they're looking for in terms of people clicking on links, executing, downloading, things that they shouldn't be doing.
And I know our own IT shop, I don't know that all email does this, but I think it's a really good thing, is when I see that it's from Angela, it shows me the actual email address that sent it. Well,
Right.
Angela should have a .sei.cmu.edu address, and if it says Angela in the name, but it has another address, then
Yes.
I know that that's likely to be a phishing email. So things like adding transparency, so that as a user, I can actually look at what's the source of this, not just what the name is on
Right.
it. That's helped me, and we have a special email called Suspicious that we
Yes.
can send things to, so that they can improve their spam filters. So there is a user aspect to this, of being aware of the possibility that you would be attacked at any time, and being cognizant of your environment. It's just like walking down a dark alley, right? You need to
Exactly.
be looking at your environment all the time and evaluating what's the risk here, and not just taking for granted that every email is going to be coming from where you think it is.
That's right.
Yes.
From the viewpoint of the SEI, what kinds of research are we doing to try and help with improving prevention activities or improving recovery activities?
Well, so I think we are working on different fronts with regards to ransomware and malware in general, being ransomware being a subset of malicious software. One of them is early detection. You should be able to detect activities that ransomware is known for before it gets too late and the user is already infected and the data is already encrypted. So if we can if we can create some early warnings, either on the network filters, on the spam filters, or actually on the actual computer systems, on workstations, or on servers, where this is actually useful and actionable. On the other hand, and so this goes with regards to network filtering, that goes with email filtering, as I mentioned. On the other hand, the other important aspect is educating users about these attacks and the kind of attacks that exist, and what should be or can be done to prevent these attacks, and also what to do in case these attacks already occurred, and how to deal
who to
with
report it
to
and such.
right, and
Right.
how to deal with this, and so we make sure that we evaluate all of the previous known attempts to install and execute malicious software, ransomware, and we basically educate users on the best practices on how to deal with malware.
And what are, do we have some examples of, so I gave a pretty intuitive best practice, which is look beyond the name to what's the actual address. Are there some other best practices that are maybe less intuitive that you have been educating IT security professionals, network administrators about things to watch for?
So the best practices for ransomware are just the same as for other malware. The difference is a lot of the mitigation. Obviously, you now have encrypted traffic with ransomware, which you don't with a lot of the other malware. But the same best practices apply, limit admin privileges. Even if you have admin privilege on a machine, don't use it for everyday work, because that gives any process running under that account the ability to access everything on the machine. If you can, limit where read and writes can occur. If you have network attached storage, like if you have a file share, take pains to make sure that those require logins so that they're not encrypted if an individual user is infected. Do web filtering. Blacklist aren't very effective. If you can implement whitelisting, though, to limit the applications that can be executed on a machine,
so
that is
that's
very
what
good.
whitelisting does.
Right, so do whitelisting.
Okay.
If you have user directories that are meant for data, don't let executables execute there.
Okay. So those are typical of the kinds of things we see in best practices. So that's the good news.
Yeah, so the
right?
good news is if you're doing good for malware in general, you should be covered with ransomware.
Okay.
The problem is how you mitigate it.
So that's that. The bad news is that the mitigations on this are essentially, there's one mitigation: wipe it out and replace, which makes that data backup probably the most important mitigation. My 87-year-old father will be glad to hear that, because he has literally a desktop full of hard disks that back up his data going back about 20 years. So he's covered.
And that is actually
and they are not attached.
And that is actually great, exactly, because one of the things about backups, and something that we've seen in enterprise environments in the past as well, where there would be backups and there would be plans to back up the data on a regular basis, and the backups would be executed, but number one, there wouldn't be a mechanism that would verify that these backups are actually still valid. So you may still have a stack of tapes or drives, but they may or may not actually be working, or may not actually contain the data anymore, given that they're maybe old or whatever the reason is.
I'm betting a couple of my dad's hard drives fit into that category.
And
or they backed up the wrong drives to begin with, yeah.
Oh no, he would never do that.
Or on the other hand, you would have the data that is backed up perfectly fine, but it's also network accessible. And newer versions of ransomware seem to be targeting not just your storage of data on your documents, folders, and things like this, but also go after backups, database backups, and so on, that either on the personal computers or on the network storage, attached storage devices. And so it's important to have this, what we call air gap, between the network that's currently running and the database backup that needs to exist elsewhere.
And that's where my dad is good, because he's got plenty of air gaps.
That's right.
So that's but I'm not so sure he's good on making sure that these are all still valid. But storage is cheap, right? So,
that's right.
So okay, so those are a few things. So I'm very happy about the fact that regular practices, are part of this. But I am also interested in, what do you think we're going to see next? We started sort of with the malware. We started with the splash pages, the phishing emails that, you could tell. You could always tell it's the beginning of the school season, because every new programmer is trying to figure out how many people he can touch, with his malware kinds of things. But ransomware, okay, we're getting into some creative and a little too easy, for my taste, ways of getting at people. what do we have to look forward to? What should we be looking for next in relationship to how these kinds of malware attacks are likely to evolve?
Well, so what we've seen so far over the past maybe 3-4 years that ransomware has been out there and constantly evolving is that ransomware has been actively catching up with the industry actually best practices in terms of how to encrypt the data. If we look back at the history of ransomware about 2-3 years ago, they would attempt to encrypt the data, but they would be using broken protocols, they would be using insecure methods to encrypt the data, and therefore the data was easily recoverable. As we look at the progression of ransomware now, we see that they're getting closer and closer to what an industry standard best practice approach to encrypt the data would be. Things that you would see at online banking, at payment systems, etc., where complicated, robust encryption solutions are being created. And so this is where ransomware is moving to, because they've seen in the past where broken solutions to broken ransomware software methods would cause people to find ways to decrypt the data without pain. And so what looking back at that, what we're going to see in the next 2-3 years is the methods to encrypt the data would evolve further as to make sure that the data is harder and harder to decrypt, which again makes the preventative measures probably more and more important, because again, the data backup is going to solve the problem regardless of how sophisticated ransomware is going to get. On the other hand, ransomware is also moving towards using, again, what we call command and control servers more and more. In that regard, where the encryption keys and the decryption solutions are stored away from access to the user, and so it's in the hands of the attacker at all times, and it also makes ransomware more efficient and more deadly, so to speak, in terms of not being able to recover the data without paying the ransom.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking the Internet of Things also makes this a little bit, I'm seeing that as a potential future. I mean, I've heard of some examples of this where, it's not taking over your computer, it's taking over some aspect of a water treatment system and things like that, where it's actually hardware that they're controlling that has some negative effect if it doesn't work correctly.
I think we're going to see that more and more. And we'll probably also see a rise in not just the fact that they're encrypting, but the ransomware along the lines of they're stealing the data that you don't want released, so they're demanding ransom to pay it so they don't release it. And that's going to be very applicable with the Internet of Things, where you have when you have movie cameras everywhere, or you have recording devices. You don't necessarily want everybody to see that.
I do wonder, though, the digital natives that grew up with technology seem to have, in many cases, less of a sense of privacy than people of my age that grew up without technology. I know I have, nephews and nieces that, go ahead and post all that stuff. I don't care. Yeah. There do seem to be some different attitudes. So there's a possibility that as even though the sophistication increases, that some of the effects may not be what they want if they target the wrong audience. Right. So that could be a positive side to some of the, the changes in the way that privacy is seen by different generations. So we'll have to see how that evolves.
Yeah, that is true. At the same time, this, I think, creates opportunities for the attacks that involve phishing emails and so on to proliferate, because people get to be more trusting, and there is more information about them that is available that can be put in a phishing email, especially if it's a targeted phishing email to an organization or to particular sets of individuals. Like if you were to receive an email from Bank of America saying that you need to log into your account to verify your credentials or whatever, right? And if it happens that you people know that you actually have a Bank of America
Yeah.
account, you're much more vulnerable to actually clicking on that link and
Right.
causing trouble if they know
Sure.
that you have
Yeah.
a bank account.
And they put the logo on and they make it look
Exactly.
except that they have that address that isn't from Bank of
Exactly.
America. That's how I get them. So
Yeah. Also,
Unless they
also,
spoofed it.
right. Also, what made ransomware very efficient over the past few years is the availability of cryptocurrency. Because previously, it would have been harder to demand payments if these payments were done with money that are traceable.
gotcha.
Now, with the availability of Bitcoin and similar cryptocurrencies, the situation is that you can easily demand money from anyone to pay into an unknown wallet, and it will be hard for law enforcement to trace it
Right.
back to the attacker. And so,
And it's global.
and it's global as well.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it can be done from overseas. It can cross boundaries easily. And so again, looking into what's going to happen next is that that cryptocurrency usage of cryptocurrency is going to probably make it easier and easier, especially now that cryptocurrencies seems to be picking up speed and seems to be more and more available. What is interesting, as we've done some research with ransomware, is that despite the fact that cryptocurrency was somewhat cumbersome and difficult to use, people still were so motivated to get their data back that they would go through hurdles of
interesting.
acquiring Bitcoin through various means, gift cards or prepaid cards or whatever, and they would still find a way to pay the ransom to get their data decrypted. And that shows the motivation to get the data, and that
Yeah.
shows the reason why ransomware seems to be so successful. Last year, I think, FBI reported that, earlier this year, FBI reported that during last year, the ransomware payments just for the quarter of a year were approaching about $200 million, right? That they've estimated. It's hard to tell, but they've estimated that that's about where we are, right? And so you can extrapolate that over a few months. You can see that it can easily get into a billion-dollar industry.
Which gives the motivation for people that want to find easy money.
That's
right.
This is an avenue that has had some success.
That's right.
So,
Exactly.
so really the message here is, as users, we have to take responsibility for doing what we can to make sure that if we do get hit with this, we can recover from it. I mean, it's the resiliency thing, right? I don't know if I'm ever going to get hit by this, but if I do, if I'm not ready to recover from it, then I'm at risk.
Right.
And probably in ways I don't want to be at risk. So that's really the message here: is prevent the risk from you can't prevent it from occurring, but you can prevent the impact.
That's right.
And that's where all these techniques come in and these best practices come in.
Put all your
So
photos on.
I think you guys are going to be busy. I'm not sure
No
this
doubt.
is what I want you to be busy with, but that's our world right now. So we need to be aware of this, and that's one of the reasons we have this series, is to help people understand what their options are, how they can respond to these kinds of things when it does happen, if it happens. Alex and Angela, I want to thank you for joining me today and talking about ransomware. I know that you co-authored a blog post on this with another of our colleagues, Jose Morales, and that blog post is available on our insights.sei.cmu.edu website. Click on the author tab and go for one of the author last names. Volynkin's a good one, Volynkin, and you should be able to find that blog post. This is one in a series of best practices in network security podcasts. We will provide resources in the transcript that will give you the links to all of the podcasts that we've done so far and ones that are upcoming as well. And for our listeners, places that you can find this podcast include the SEI website, www.sei.cmu.edu/podcast. You can also find it on our iTunes U site for Carnegie Mellon, and you can find it on the SEI YouTube channel. So any of those will get you access to this. Thank you for joining us today, and if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to email us at info@sei.cmu.edu. Thank you for watching.